All right, I think we are live. All right, good deal. Well, hey, good morning. What's going on, everybody? Jameson here. You know, the Constitution clearly puts a restriction on the federal government, not the citizen. But what's happened is that over time, our government has used crises and threats to our national security as an excuse to introduce legislation in the name of public safety, right? Which ultimately results in our liberties being stripped from us little by little over time. Now, I don't know if any of y'all have ever seen the movie The Matrix, but what they've done, the establishment, right? The rhinos and the globalist elite, they've created a matrix type simulation of liberty, right? It's an elaborate illusion that has kept all of us enslaved and dependent upon the government to solve all of our problems. It's cost us trillions of dollars, and it's brainwashed so many Americans into electing people into office that continue to vote away our liberty and our money. You know, and here's something else. You know, we've replaced the word liberty with freedom, right? And we use them interchangeably as if they're the same thing, and they're not. You know, freedom is mostly an internal assurance that you have that's independent from what's going on around you. For example, there's some people that don't like me, but that's okay because I tend to try to live my life free from the opinions of others, right? That's freedom. Some people have been enslaved to an addiction because maybe abuse, right? Or because they're trying to fill some kind of a void in their lives. But they work hard, they overcome it, and they become free from that addiction, right? That's freedom. But liberty is being free within a society from oppressive restrictions imposed by an authority on one's way of life, behavior, or political and religious view. So we can have freedom without liberty. The two are not synonymous. You know, our founding fathers understood this. And it's why that they believe that we have a certain set of unalienable, God-given, not government-given rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now notice they didn't say life, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness, but liberty. The more government involvement we have in our lives, the less liberty we truly have. Now, this kind of brings me to my primary opponent, Dan Crenshaw. You know, I've received 2 of these mailers so far this week. I received 3 of them last week. It's a lot of mailers. Somebody's working overtime. Oh, I've had my 4-foot by 8-foot signs mysteriously vanish. Just out of thin air. I received a voicemail actually yesterday morning about one that was being cut down. And then another that was reported by a comment here on Facebook later on that day. Now here's my question. Why is someone who has literally raised millions of dollars so far in this election cycle so frantic about a grassroots campaign like ours? I mean, we've only raised $45,000. Well, let me know in the comments below what you think, but let's get into this. So let's talk about this flyer. So I made a post yesterday on Facebook saying let's talk about this. It says Dan's opponents are lying about him. Really? Dan is the only true conservative in the race. Really? Who's lying now? Dan Crenshaw is one of the most conservative members of Congress. Conservative Heritage Action for America gave Dan's voting record a score of 98%. Is there anyone that actually thinks that Conservative Heritage Action for America is still a reliable and credible source? I mean, after their former president came out and said that, after the George Floyd incident happened, he said that incident was proof that systemic racism is still an Achilles heel for America, right? So we're supposed to take this organization seriously. Meanwhile, we have true liberty-loving organizations, conservative organizations like Conservative Review. So they have a tool called Liberty Score. You go to libertyscore.conservativereview.com. You can look up any member of Congress, whether it's the House or the Senate, and it'll tell you their Liberty Score. So while Conservative Heritage Action for America has a score of 98%, libertyscore.conservative review, which is owned by Blaze Media, by the way, has him listed at 74%. So why the discrepancy? How can you? And I also learned that there was another scorecard that has them listed at like 60-something%. Don't remember off the top of my head, but Conservative Review is typically what is my source. He also has an A rating from both the NRA. They might want to rethink that, and the National Right to Life Committee. So why are people lying about his voting record? Because it's primary season, and some people will say and do anything to get power. Like insider trading? Like being a young global leader with the World Economic Forum and being a student of Klaus Schwab? Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't know. Here's the truth, according to this. Dan Crenshaw never voted for a vaccine database. He actually introduced a bill to end Biden's vaccine mandate and stand up for your medical freedoms. There's a little virtue signal there. But let's talk about how Dan Crenshaw never voted for a vaccine database. What they're talking about there is HR 550. Okay, so as soon as news started spreading around that Dan Crenshaw voted to fund a national or a federal vaccine database, he hopped on, I think it was Instagram, went live on Instagram, put out a video and said that this was actually Republican-led, and it actually put a restriction on the federal government. And there's a couple other things that he said, and he was like, it did not fund a federal vaccine database. So I'm not just going to listen to that response, right? I dug deeper, and here's what I found out. The bill, HR 550, the sponsor of that bill is Ann Custer, who's one of the most liberal Democrats out in New Hampshire. Whenever you look at her reasoning for sponsoring the bill to begin with, you look at the bullet points, it's not rocket surgery to see that it's a federal vaccine database, right? And it was funded by $400 million, by the way. $400 million, as if that wasn't enough reason to vote no on the bill, because that's my tax dollars, your tax dollars. But then he introduced a bill to end Biden's vaccine mandate, stand up for your medical freedoms. I just see that as kind of a virtue signal. We won't really get into that. The main thing I wanted to talk about here, guys, is he did vote to fund $400 million to a federal vaccine database in HR 550. So that's the truth. Look it up. Then it says Dan Crenshaw never voted for red flag laws. In fact, he is the only Republican with anti-red flag law legislation in HR 5417, which he introduced a year ago. Actually, if I remember, my memory serves correctly, HR 5417, now don't quote me on this, I'm kind of going by memory here, was actually introduced after he voted yes on the National Defense Authorization Act of 2021 back in September. The NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act 2021, back in September, contained red flag laws. Specifically, red flag gun confiscation laws. Now, let's talk about that for a second, because his explanation on why he voted yes on it is because the Senate, he knew the Senate was going to strip it out before it came back around. So, two things I want to say to that. Number one, if you knew the Senate was going to strip it out, why not just vote no on it to begin with? Why not let your constituents know that you are pro Second Amendment, that the word shall not be infringed actually means something to you? Well, why not do that? And for those of you that don't know what red flag laws are, so if you've ever seen the movie Minority Report with Tom Cruise, where you're convicted of a crime before a crime's ever been committed, right? It's pre-crime. It's not innocent until proven guilty. It's guilty until proven innocent. So that's what red flag laws are, right? So let's say that your next door neighbor doesn't like you and they know that you have guns, and so they want to get back at you. So they call the authority and say, hey, I'm afraid for my life. My neighbor's got guns and they're crazy. So the authorities show up, take your guns without due process, and you have to go to court and prove that you're not crazy, but just to get your guns back, right? Those are red flag laws. Why wouldn't you vote no on that? Second thing, why wouldn't you vote no on that if you knew the Senate was going to strip it out? Second thing is, I don't know about you, but I want my representation to do their job, not pass the buck on to somebody else. I want my representative in the House to do their due diligence, to do what I've hired them to do, not pass the buck on to the Senate for them to do the job that he should have done. That's not leadership, and that's not the leadership that I want representing me, and I don't believe that's the leadership that you want representing you. So let's talk about the anti-red flag law legislation. The Constitution of the United States is the most supreme document in our country. The Second Amendment puts a restriction on the government, not the citizen. And the Second Amendment doesn't give us our right to bear arms. It recognizes that it is a right granted to us by God. But somehow, Crenshaw believes that a piece of legislation is going to protect something that already protects something. I mean, guys, that's not less government. That's more government. That's the big government creating a problem, and then government swooping in and being the answer to that problem. You know, Reagan said that the 9 scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. But this is exactly what legislation like this does. Like, hey, let's protect our Second Amendment and create legislation that protects our Second Amendment whenever the Second Amendment is already part of the supreme document in our government that recognizes an unalienable right granted to us by God. We're not going to legislate our way out of this. People need to stop voting against the Constitution. They need to start doing their job and voting according to the Constitution. We don't need to rewrite the Constitution. We need to reread the Constitution. And I expect that my representation, especially whenever they're from here in Texas, you know, Texas, we love our guns, but I highly expect that that the word shall not be infringed are going to mean something to them the same way that it means to me and my family for generations. And I'm sure the same way it means to you and yours. It doesn't matter what else was in the bill. And I hear people say this all the time. Well, you can't just cherry pick. No. If there is one piece of legislation in a bill that is unconstitutional or violates the Constitution, it gets voted no. Right? There's never enough good in a bill to overwrite all of the pork. Right? There's never enough good in a bill to undo all of the bad. Ever. If there is one thing that's constitutional in a piece of legislation, it needs to be voted down, no questions asked. Period. Because if you give the government an inch, you give these globalists an inch, you give the establishment an inch, and they will take a mile. And when do we draw the line? When do we draw the line and say that enough is enough? We need people in Congress that are not going to violate the Constitution, that are not going to vote your money and your liberty away, our liberties and our money away, because they'll just keep creating a problem and then offering their solution whenever they were the ones that created the problem to begin with. Again, not to quote Reagan again, but Reagan said, government is not the answer to our problems. Government is the problem. But somehow we have people in office, even here in the state legislature, we have people in office that think that we're going to legislate our way out of this. So we create law upon law upon law upon law. And before you know it, we don't have hardly any rights left, because if we violate this piece of legislation, then it violates this piece of legislation, and then it becomes super complicated whenever the Constitution is simple. We have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, so long as it doesn't endanger and infringe on the life, liberty, and property of others. And no, I'm not talking about no government. Government is a necessary evil, and our founding fathers understood that. It has to uphold rule of law. But our federal government's 2.5 main priorities is, number one, to recognize and protect our unalienable God-given rights. Number two, to secure our borders from outside invasion, which Corn Pop is failing at. So is Abbott. But the half part of that 2.5 is to somewhat maintain our infrastructure across state lines. That's it. And according to the 9th and the 10th Amendment, the rest goes to the people and to the states. It's not complicated. It goes on to say, these are just a few examples of the lies told. People will lie over and over to gain more attention and power. But you know the truth. Yes, I think that you do know the truth now. So again, he did vote for to fund a federal vaccine database by $400 million in H.R. 550. Yes, he did vote for red flag laws. And yes, those red flag laws were stripped out by the Senate, but he still voted yes and sent it to the Senate, which is bad enough. So yes, he did vote for red flag law. So that anti-red flag law legislation, H.R. 5417, is a big giant virtue signal, and it's pointless. That right is already protected. Red flag laws are already outlawed by the Constitution, shall not be infringed. Okay, so Jameson, you're complaining a lot, and I'm not complaining, I'm trying to educate. It's important that we are able to distinguish the truth from the lies here. It's important that we educate. But let's talk about some solutions, okay? I want to talk about three priorities, if you will, that I have going into DC. Number one, I want to go to DC and look every single Republican in the eye that's not acting and voting with conservative principles and principles of liberty. And I want to ask them how it feels to be a turncoat to their district. Then I want to expose their voting records to their constituents so their constituents know exactly how they vote. Now, why would I want to do that? Because then their constituents can vote their butts out of office and can get an America First representative in there that's going to vote America First principles. The only way that we're going to fix this problem is we have to start from the top down. We have to gut the entire system. So yeah, I want to expose their voting records so that their constituents know exactly how they vote. And I know most people should know, but unfortunately, most people don't. They're not paying attention. You know, whenever you have the very people that say, don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion, are the very ones that are using politics and using religion to expand their agenda. But we don't talk about politics and religion. It's led to a grave misunderstanding of both. We don't pay attention to what's really going on. And then before you know it, we wonder, oh, I can't own land anymore? When did that happen? Oh, I can't hardly pay my rent and I haven't had a raise. You know, like the cost of living keeps going up. I'm paying, $3.50 a gallon for gas. Like, how did that happen? Why is that happening? I don't know. People don't pay attention. So yeah, I want to expose their voting records, make sure their constituents know exactly how they vote so their constituents can vote their butts out of office and put in somebody that can do the job that they should have been doing to begin with. Then I want to work with the members of the House that are voting according to conservative principles and principles of liberty to repeal all of the bad legislation that never should have been passed in the first place. We need to repeal the bad legislation. Beyond that, vote down all of the bad legislation so that it never becomes law. Second thing I want to do is I want to hold workshops and events here in the district to expose exactly what goes on behind the curtain. You know, being a Texan, I was born here, raised here. I plan on dying here. So pray for me when I go to the swamp, because I don't want to die in the swamp. I don't want to be in the swamp any more than I absolutely have to be. So whenever I'm not there voting, I want to be back here exposing, because we need to wake people up. We need the American people to start caring again about the political process. And I know what it's like to not care. I know what it's like to feel like my vote doesn't count. We need to re-engage people to re-engage in the political process. So yeah, I want to expose exactly what goes on behind the curtain. Now, let's talk about some policy stuff, right? I want to talk a little bit about policy. So I want to hold this fraudulent administration accountable for their tyrannical actions. Think about the families' lives and the incomes that they've just absolutely destroyed through unconstitutional mandates. They need to be held accountable for that. 100%. We definitely want to work and fight to secure our borders. There's no reason for us. So we've got this issue, right, in Ukraine where Russia is invading Ukraine, and we have no business going over there whenever there's an invasion over there, whenever we have an invasion here in our southern border, right? We try to go over there and nation build, and yet our nation's falling apart. We need to finish Trump's wall, right? We need to end catch and release. And we need to put a stop to all of the free benefits that illegals are getting that we don't even have access to as American citizens, but yet they come over here and they get access to all of these benefits. We need to de-incentivize them. And then we also need to put an end to the unconstitutional power that has been given to these unelected bureaucrats and special interest groups. And the way that we can do that is the fair tax. So I'm a huge advocate of the fair tax, because the fair tax allows us to repeal the 16th Amendment and restore Jeffersonian tax principles, which people say, oh, that's kind of a pipe dream. No, it's not. It's the fair tax. The fair tax will put an end to the IRS and will allow you to keep 100% of your paycheck. I want to encourage you to go to fairtax.org and read up about the fair tax. They actually have a couple of really simple 1 to 2 minute videos that break it down. The fair tax is something that there's a lot of people that sign the fair tax pledge, but then they go to Washington and they don't advocate for it at all. They don't fight for it at all. Okay, I've signed the fair tax pledge, and I will go and I will fight for that, for the fair tax. And that's something that I definitely would like to see. If we sign the fair tax into law and we repeal the 16th Amendment and we get rid of the IRS, we will end 80 to 90% or more of these bureaucracies and this crony capitalism. And so before we jump off of here, our fight is 4 things. Number 1, it's to restore liberty. Now, I've already talked about how liberty is an illusion, right? We need to restore liberty. And then refund the police. So, Jameson, what do you mean by that? Do you mean federal funding? Absolutely not. Can you name one thing government's ever touched they've made better? They destroy everything they touch. No, I don't want federal funding for law enforcement. I want the government to get out of the freaking way of the free market, because if government gets out of the way, then our communities can start to stand in the gap for our local city police departments. But what they want is they want to federalize the police, right? They want to defund, disarm, and dismantle our local city police departments so they can federalize the police. And I want to stand against that. I also want to work with local communities and not just pass the buck, because again, a lot of representatives say, well, my job in Congress is just to represent my constituents, not to work with state reps and not to work with local. No, that's passing the buck. I want to work with state reps. I want to work with our local communities to start introducing constitutional training into our police departments. I talk with police officers all the time and they don't know the Constitution. We need to introduce constitutional training so that they know when they are or are not violating the Constitution, because they do take an oath to defend the Constitution. So we need to restore liberty, refund the police, make America America again. The term American exceptionalism comes from the early 1800s. A Frenchman that came over here and said, man, what you guys have here is exceptional. So you're telling me that your rights aren't granted to you by government, but they're granted to you by God? That's exceptional. You are the exception, not the rule. That's American exceptionalism. We've taken God and morality out of everything. We need to get back to that American exceptionalism, make America America again. And the fourth thing, fire Dan Crenshaw from DC. So let me know in the comments below, what do you think? What are your thoughts on what I've talked about here today? And I also want to humbly ask for your vote. If anything that I've said today resonates with you, right? I want to ask for your vote. I also want to ask for your support. So you can go to JamesonEllis.com. You can make a contribution, whether it's $1 or $1,000 or the max of $2,900. Every little bit counts. And for those of you that have contributed, for those of you that have donated, your generosity is making a difference, which is why I've received 2 of these this week and 3 last week. And I also heard there's robocalls that are also going out. So apparently, raising over $7 million, and here we are. We've raised $45,000, and we've got Crenshaw worried. So thank you. I also want to make sure I remind you today's Thursday. No, tomorrow is the last day of early voting. So if you haven't yet, go and vote. Tuesday, March the 1st, is primary voting day. And so you want to make sure that you vote, let your voice be heard, help me fire Dan Crenshaw from DC. It's time that Texas too has true conservative representation. Love you guys and God bless.